Welcome back to Beagle Eye Vision. So I did make another mistake. I recorded this entire episode without the microphone on, so I have to re-record it. And so you guys obviously didn't get to see how I got to the Vim factory. It was great. It was fun. I had a lot of fun on that episode. I'm so mad, but it's okay. Life goes on. I wanted to rehear this episode anyway. He said there's so much powerful stuff in this episode that Brandon talks about. I'm very excited. This is episode 37 called Astro Theology of the CubbyWhole podcast. Thanks for choosing Beagle Eye Visions for your entertainment. We're going to roam around Far Harbor and the Vim factory. I love roaming around these soda factories. We're going to get some more knowledge before I have to go to work today. All right. Thanks again. Let's go.
And that's one of the things about religion that we have to remember when we're talking about that makes it such a hot topic issue is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about.
Hello, Hive Mind, and to all the beautiful and wonderful people that are listening and tuning into this podcast. I am your host, Brandon Martin, and welcome to the 37th CubbyWhole podcast, where important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. Today is January 30th, 2021. Please make sure to check out all of our previous episodes and other content at the CubbyWhole website. That is CubbyWhole.com. So today, we are going to be continuing on with the methods of manipulation that I started last year, and we've been progressively working through the list. There will be slides available for this episode at the CubbyWhole website on the podcast page. All of us here at the CubbyWhole Network would very much appreciate that more people share the information that we are dedicating our lives to sharing with you. We know that a lot of people are not just going to run across the CubbyWhole randomly, so we would really like it to see a bit more movement, and not just for the CubbyWhole, for all the great teachers out there and all their work. You need to share it as much as possible and preserve that information. I recommend for people who are worried about EMP attacks to get Faraday bags. I mean, I know a lot of people that have the Faraday wallets that protect their credit cards from being robbed and being hacked and infiltrated by external sources, but they won't do that for this information, and that's just ridiculous. It shows what they put value on, which is money over top of true scientific knowledge. And they don't really realize like how at jeopardy this knowledge is becoming each and every day. This is very relevant at this time in our history. All we have to do is take a look at how much censorship across all the media platforms is taking place, and we know how crucial it is to preserve this knowledge for posterity and progeny. We are going to be picking up with the method of manipulation known as religion. One of the most powerful methods of mind control that has ever existed. It is very crucial to understand and distinguish the difference between a dogmatic religious belief system or institutionalized religions with the concept of a true hierarchical stepwise progression into the mystery traditions such as natural law and morality. I think Stoicism and Gnosticism are very good examples of this. even though they both have ultimately failed in their task, we still should take heed, and it would be wise for us to behoof the wisdom that has come from them. The reason why I bring this up is to make it clear that within religion, there is always a core of truth. We must not throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to this. But religious belief systems and institutionalized religion is one of the main enemies that we together are battling against every day. We're going to be speaking more on astrotheology, specifically pertaining to the solar cult doctrine. Now, I want to make it clear also that everything that I am bringing to the table here is simply scratching the surface of this amazing knowledge. We each have to do our own due diligence into understanding this knowledge and really gain a vast variety of eclectic material through comparative research to really start to understand how important this topic truly is. Not only that, but it is also important that once we have that understanding, that we apply it in some way or fashion to dismantle the dogma and to bring to the surface the truth that religion does hold. We are trying to get away from all the garbage. We are trying to peel back the shell of the exoteric doctrines that covertly conceal the truth underneath the dogma. I mean, to me, what religion has done to people is literally removed their frontal lobe and thrown it in a garbage disposal. The more we literalize the Bible, the less we truly understand its esoteric meaning. We have to take a much more holistic approach to find the root of the religious belief systems and trace it back into our history by following the ideas, because ultimately all religions are based upon astrotheology. As I was explaining in my previous solo episode, the archetypal figure known as Jesus was an aspect, or what I would refer to is an aspect of our consciousness that we must raise out of the darkness and into the light. Or we could say to resurrect ourselves out of the coffin and into the light of truth, love, and freedom. The way that I look at heaven is it is a state of consciousness that must be manifested into the physical domain. The entire concept of heaven and hell is a Hegelian dialectical manipulation that relies solely upon fear and belief rather than a science of natural law to ensure that people behave in accordance with the arbitrary notions of those who are writing those laws. When we are speaking about religion, what we are truly speaking about is who gets to be God's deputies on earth, like Douglas says at the beginning of the episode. We are speaking about law, and law in a proxy form. We are speaking about authority. From my research, I have found that the title Christ is given to those who have reached a certain degree in consciousness, or in fact a certain degree within the mystery traditions. So we could say that if Jesus was a real person, he must have been initiated into the mystery traditions of ancient Egypt. And whether or not he was initiated into the lower or higher mysteries is still up for debate. I would say that he was only initiated into the higher mysteries. And now, don't get confused with the terminology there about the mysteries. The higher mysteries deal with the solar doctrine far more than they deal with the stellar doctrine. So, The lesser mysteries does not mean they are less valuable. Actually, the lesser mysteries are far more relevant and far more important. The higher mysteries is what takes us into Neoplatonism. I'm not going to completely explain that here, but we do need to understand that the lesser or the earlier mysteries are considered to be the purest form of the stellar mythos. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I believe that the title Christ is actually given to people who have been initiated into the mystery schools and have reached a certain degree or level in consciousness. This is what it means to have Christ consciousness, meaning that we all can be at that level of Christ. And this is activated through the heart-based consciousness, so these become synonymous with each other. This also has to do with the rising of the Kundalini energy. Now, the name Jesus actually comes from Yehoshua. This is also related to the name Joshua as well. In Hebrew, it is broke down into 5 parts, which is Yod, He, Shin, Vav, He. This also relates back to the 5 alchemical elements. Now, this gets simplified later on down to only 4 elements, and I find that highly intriguing and very important because it's a reduction in the symbolism and it's a reduction in the mythos and the knowledge. The name Yehoshua became very popular with the Renaissance occultists, specifically in the second half of the 16th century. It is important to understand that when Yehoshua negates the letter Shin from the name, it is a tetragrammaton, whereas when it is added in, it is a pentagrammaton, which correlates to the pentagonal symbolism. The tetragrammaton literally takes out the idea of spirit and puts us all in materialism. The name Jesus is interesting as well because this is where we get our word yes from, and it correlates to our gesture of yes as well, being up and down movement with our head. Yes is jess, or juice. And this has a correlation to our word yeah, or yah, and this also correlates to the word year, which puts more emphasis on the solar cult doctrine. So now, we're going to take a look at parallels between the Egyptian deity Horus in the solar doctrine compared to Yehoshua or Jesus. So we're going to take a look at the parallels within the story to show how we can correlate these to many different traditions and many different deities of the ancient world. This is just one example of thousands upon thousands of examples that could be given. So we have the parallel of the conception between Jesus and Horus, which is by a virgin birth. We have the father parallel. Horus, the only begotten son of god Osiris. We have the parallel to Horus's mother, which is Mary. And if you think back to when I was speaking about maritime admiralty law, we can understand the symbolic correlation to Mary being the water. And we also have Mary, who is Jesus' mother. We have the foster father of Horus, which is Seb. And this correlates to Joseph. The way that this correlates to Joseph is with Seb being broken into Joseph. The B and the PH become phonetically derived from each other and are connected. We have the foster father's ancestry, which is of royal descent for both of them. We have the birth location, which is in a cave for Horus, or in a cave or stable for Jesus. We have the Annunciation by an angel to Isis, his mother, by an angel to Mary, his mother. Horus had 12 disciples. Jesus had 12 disciples. Horus was known to walk on water, cast out demons, heal the sick, restore sight to the blind. This is also known in the Jesus allegory. So as we can see, there are tons of correlations. And I mean, I could go down this list infinitely. I can give some sources for people to look into these things. I would recommend the book, The Christ Conspiracy, The Jesus Mysteries, anything from Gerald Massey, the renowned Egyptologist, the book Sun Gods, and I would also recommend the documentary Zeitgeist for a great introduction to this. In the last episode, episode 32 that I did, we were speaking about astrotheology and how it pertains to religion and mind control and the institutions that are manipulating consciousness at a mass level. There is one correction that I would like to make and make a little point about this. In my last episode, I had mentioned the precession of the equinox, and I had told you guys that it goes counterclockwise, which is correct. But then I started to move clockwise through my examples of that precession. So I just wanted to make it clear that we're moving counterclockwise. That's why it's called a precession. And we are now entering, or have entered, depending on where you get your sources of information. Some people say we're not entering into this age yet. Other people say that we've already entered into the age of Aquarius now. I personally stick with the idea that we have already entered into the age of Aquarius, but I can get behind that we do have ambiguity in our timekeeping records. And the main way that we can find out whether this is true or not is just by keeping track of the constellations. So from my studies into the constellations, yes, we have moved into the age of Aquarius. We spoke upon the Egyptian mythology being correlated with the astrotheological progression of the sun from the vernal equinox into the autumnal equinox. And I believe that's how you pronounce that, but it's just the autumn equinox. The equinox during September. Another name for the precession of the equinox is also called the Platonic year. And as a brief re-mention here, the best way to remember how long the precession takes place is just by thinking of it in a rounded estimate of 24,000 years. Now, it is more accurate to say it is more around 25,000 years to 26,000 years, maybe a little bit more or a little bit less when it comes to those numbers. It does change. This is not an absolute number, but to generalize this makes it easier to understand and to really correlate to why we have the solar calendars the way that we do, and why do we have the time on the clock the way that we do. There's a lot to this, and you can correlate this to a lot of different solar aspects in our lives, because our entire world is run by a solar occult doctrine, and that's what we're trying to explain here. At least that's what I am trying to explain here by bringing up this form of manipulation. And yes, there are positive attributes to the solar cult. So I'm not trying to marginalize the positive traits and aspects of the solar cult, but we do need to realize the negative aspects. We need a process of negation, a apophatic deduction, to understand why we are living in such a world filled with suffering. And one of those main reasons, from my point of view, is because we've allowed the dark solar cult, if we want to give emphasis through a different name, the dark solar cult, power to reign over this world through institutionalized religious belief systems that have not been dealt with by educated people. And one reason for that is because most of us are not very well educated people. We think that memorization of something means that we have understanding of that thing. And this is why IQ tests are very lacking when it comes to actually gauging somebody's true intelligence. Not only does it lack the moral testing or ethical testing, but it also lacks the testing for true understanding, which is very difficult to test, but it can be tested properly. But it is called a precession because the sun moves in retrograde motion through each house of the zodiac counterclockwise. And this consists of movements in 30 degrees. It moves 1 degree backwards every 72 years. One of the main reasons why we get this precession is because the sun's retrograde motion is based upon the Earth's wobble as it orbits the sun. The Earth's wobble is why different constellations appear in different places in the night sky. The sun also appears to be in motion in the galaxy, likely due to the gravitational pull on it from other spatial objects. Now, to give a little bit of history to where we get this precession of the equinox. Now, from my point of view, it obviously dates back far into our antiquity that goes well into the stellar cult and probably very early stellar cult. But what is credited as the historical point when we first discovered this sacred movement of the celestial bodies and constellations. It was done by the Greek astronomer, and his name is Hipparchus. And this took place around 170 BCE.
Ground floor.
But like I said, this was obviously known by the more ancient astronomers of ancient Egypt because they do have this science preserved. The problem is that the Greeks did not understand how to read the ancient Egyptian sign language. So what they did is they just took what they could understand, and everything else they pretty much left behind, or they, reimagined it in their own image. We don't have the full tapestry of the ancient Egyptian sciences where all this is rooted and has been preserved for hundreds of thousands of years, longer than what most people perceive it has been. So what I would call this is a rediscovery of the precession of the equinox. Now, by his calculations, the Piscean age would end and the age of Aquarius would begin at around 2040. And at this point, Aquarius will be behind the sun at the vernal equinox, not Pisces. Like I said, we're moving counterclockwise through this process and this cycle. Before this, we given rise to the Aryan age, and about 2,000 to 2,200 years before that, we were in the age of Taurus, the bull. And we can see this in some biblical examples, such as Cain slew his brother Abel. Each brother was betrothed to a twin sister. Thus, the death of Abel symbolically ended with the age of Gemini. Albert Pike describes the reverence of the Persians felt for Taurus. So it's very important. So a good example of this would be, check out the movie 300, and Xerxes, the king of the Persians, he has the two golden bowls on his throne when he marches in to conquer the land. And this is symbolic astronomically of the changing of the
Ground floor.
zodiacal symbols. In Zoroaster's cave of initiation, the sun and the planets were represented overhead in gems and gold. Also, the zodiac. This is, a symbol of the zodiac. So we need to understand how these symbolic references work. The sun appeared emerging from the back of Taurus in the constellation of the Bull. In the constellation of the Bull, we also find the Seven Sisters, which is known as Pleiades. Now, Pleiades is associated with the southern polar constellations. And I find that very interesting because we talk about the seven quite a bit here, more specifically the northern polar constellations. But in some of the lesser understanding of the first degree of Freemasonry, we find that a lot of Freemasons associate the seven stars above the middle pillar with Pleiades. Now, this, to me, is actually incorrect. The seven stars above the middle pillar, the Ionic pillar, is actually associated to Horus and the six glorious ones in the stellar mythos. And this is about the highest of the high, the one great spirit in the northern polar constellation, where they had venerated their ideas of the grand architect of the universe. Another thing I'd like to point out is in the age of Taurus, we also give rise to the bull cults, right? Where we see a lot of sacrificial offerings being made up in the symbolic forms of blood rituals through sacrificing animals such as the bull. And we also see a lot of symbolism coming from this. A movie that comes to mind for this is the end of Apocalypse Now, where they sacrifice the bull at the end. But you have certain cults like the Minoans on the island of Crete. In the sacred Indian text Rig Veda, which is 3500 BCE, dating it back to the Taurus age, the god Sura references a solar bull who shines out through all the sky with the fire god Agni, which likened to a bull with hair on fire. Now, what I would like to say about this is a lot of these, to me, are in conjunction with death cults, because the Egyptians at this point had come out of their perfected eschatology, and the true nature cults or life cults has started to degrade, and now we're getting into the sacrifice of animals to the higher deities. So, I mean, all you gotta do is take a look around you. Think about all the symbolism within your daily life that pertains to solar cult. And yes, I will be talking about the symbolism in the next section of the weapons of manipulation when we get into subversive use of symbolism. I want to give a little bit of clarity here because I had a question from a listener. They asked me what the definition of astrotheology actually is. So if you are new to the subject, and I happen to have not clarified that up to this point, the word astrotheology comes from a combination of three words. Astro, as in relating to the stars or celestial objects and their movements, frequencies, vibrations, etc. Theo, as relating to God or deities. And the suffix logi, which means the study of. This word also comes from the word logos, which means word. And that has very symbolic reference, because if you study philosophy, you should be familiar with the logos and how important that is. And of course, I will be opening that up in my philosophical discussion in the future when we start to open up the four branches of philosophy. Now, see, we have astrotheology preserved all around us. We can find it within the textual context of many ancient scriptures, but I'm going to give a really good example of this where it is preserved in our 7-day week. First thing that we need to understand when it comes to this is that the ancients could only see the 7 celestial bodies with their naked eye. And these were represented as the 7 primary deities. These were the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and the last one that they could seemingly see with their naked eyes was Saturn. Saturn represented the dark sun, or the opposing force of our sun. It is also important to note the differences between the heliocentric model and the geocentric model. The geocentric model you find often in the Christian text, where everything is circling around our planet Earth. The heliocentric model, obviously within the word helios, you understand that it represents the sun. So this is what we commonly know and use in our scientific methodologies, that the planets revolve around the sun. It is important to stay oriented when it comes to these things when we are looking at the allegories and the context of the ancient scriptures and astrotheology. These were known as the 7 Elohim. Elohim comes from the Hebrew Bible. It means the wanderers. So these are the 7 wanderers. And I would say that they were the lowercase g gods. Okay? And it's very important to understand that. And whenever we look at ancient cultures and see things like polytheism, it is important to distinguish between the one great spirit and the archetypal celestial bodies that are representations of attributes of the one great spirit. So polytheism tends to be a way of breaking up the attributes of the one great spirit based upon characteristics and movements of these celestial bodies. So ultimately what we find is that they tend to be monotheistic, not always, but the Egyptians definitely were monotheistic, even though they may have a polytheistic system of deities. It's important to not take these literally and to understand the spiritual context in which the ancients were trying to pass down this great knowledge and science that they had discovered and preserved within many different forms of communication for us to enhance our own consciousness and create a better world with. What we're trying to do here is find the ubiquitous nature between all religions and bring them together so that we understand that they ultimately have one source. All this knowledge comes back to one source, one location, and in my point of view, it comes from Africa. And a lot of people do have issues with that because a lot of people want to contend with what modern scholars and archaeologists and anthropologists have stated about where we all come from. And I have no issue with that. What I say to that is bring on the challenge, because any type of data must be incorporated into this, and through the scientific inquiry, we will come to an understanding if we do our due diligence into that. So, back to my subject. So let's take a look at the 7-day week. Now, some of these are very, very easy to understand. We have Monday, which is Moon's Day. In the Greek mythology, the moon goddess was Selene. And one way that we can break down these days is by looking to other languages to translate their planetary word for that day. So what we have in the French language, which you can follow along with the slides, you have lundi in French, which means moon, and this is Monday. Tuesday is a little bit more complex. but it is named after the god Tu, which is spelled T-I-W. This is where we get our word Tuesday from. Who was the Old English equivalent to the Roman god Mars. So in the French language, we find that Mardi also means Mars, and this is Tuesday. Wednesday is Woden's Day. Woden being the Old English name for the Norse god Odin, who the Romans considered to be the equivalent to their god Mercury. In French, this is Mercredi, which means Mercury. Thursday is Thor's Day, which should be very blunt to understand that this is the Norse god Thor, and Thor being the equivalent to the Roman god Jupiter. In French, this is Judy, which means Jupiter. And obviously, they are associated with these deities because...
Alright, I'm going to take a break right there. I really have to use the restroom, and then I'm going to come back and continue finishing off this episode before I have to go to work. Don't forget to put some W in your cup. Use code BeagleEyeVision. Get 10% off your purchase at W.GG. Get yourself some sugar-free, clean game fuel for roaming the wasteland. And thank you for choosing Beagle Eye Vision for your entertainment. Stay tuned and stay golden.